H.A.C.K. Chapter 901, Projection of a Quasi-Sage. When Li Yunmu spoke, demonic energy bubbled forth from his punch, and an even more formidable presence erupted from him, which was extremely close to that of a master god. The system had said that the Yin son of heaven was the son of Yin emperor who was a quasi-true god powerhouse. This kind of person would have certainly given some life-saving treasures to his son. If Li Yunmu didn't use his full strength, Yin son of heaven might escape. Then there would be no end to the troubles, so Li Yunmu used his full strength from the start to ensure that the Yin son of heaven definitely died. After it was done, Li Yunmu would kill the 5 ancient gods and Azura. Everyone who colluded with the people from beyond the heavens had to die. If he waited for the return of the 5 master gods, he might not have the opportunity to kill them. There was someone among the master gods who was collaborating with the people from beyond the heavens. It was something the true god knew for sure. After the seals of the master gods were removed, the return of true god would naturally suppress them. Before that, Li Yunmu wanted to kill all the traitorous gods of the origin world and the people from beyond the heavens who had entered the origin world. Yin son of heaven was lying on the ground, unable to move. Even if he was a true immortal who had comprehended domain and could raise his strength to golden immortal level, which was comparable to that of ancient gods in his domain, he didn't have the ability to resist when suppressed by a quasi-master god. He shrunk his domain, which was originally enveloping the entire room, until it only covered his body. The wind created by the force of the punch exploded and it cut through the domain like a hot knife cutting through butter. It went straight for the space between Yin son of heaven's eyebrows. The demonic energy drilled into his glabella like a snake. The complexion of Yin son of heaven turned sluggish, then his eyes suddenly regained their vigor and he said with a smile. Even if you are a quasi-master god, so what? I have my emperor father's imprint, so you cannot kill me. When he said that, a light shone in the crack on his glabella. A tiny figure walked out. It became larger with each step. Finally, when it stood in front of Yin son of heaven, it showed up to be a youth with black eyes and wearing the same golden clothes as the Yin son of heavens. The new person seemed to almost have material form. "Dao friend, you are being excessive. Won't bullying the weak influence your Dao heart?" the projection of Yin emperor said in a calm voice. Although it was only a projection and Li Yunmu already possessed the strength of a quasi-master god, he surprisingly still felt an intense sense of crisis. There's no need to bother with rules when facing an enemy. Only the one who survives is correct, Li Yunmu calmly said. The projection of Yin emperor laughed faintly and said, "This is naturally correct. But the origin world is weak, and it will be defeated by us sooner or later. All the people of the origin world will become our slaves, and you also won't be an exception. If you agree to swear allegiance to me, I could bestow the cultivation of a master god on you." After saying that, the projection of Yin emperor began to wait. Only 5 master gods had existed in the origin world since it was born, so he was convinced about the choice that the native of the origin world would make. A master god's position was sufficient to make a quasi-master god native go crazy. Even in beyond the heavens, countless people wanted to become great principal golden immortals, which were the equivalent of master gods. Li Yunmu raised his head and looked at the Yin emperor with a smile. "You want to buy me with the position of master god? Back then, did you use the position of true god as a chip to ally with the master god of the origin world? Using the position of true god in exchange for an alliance?" The projection of Yin emperor laughed then sincerely said, "Dao friend sure knows how to joke. The position of true god isn't something which emperor monarchs like us can promise to provide. Even after so many years, I only possess the strength of a quasi-sage. We shouldn't stray from the topic, however. What will be Dao friend's choice? Do you agree to swear allegiance or would you rather die?" "What if I prefer to die than submit?" Li Yunmu asked with a cold smile. When the projection of Yin emperor heard his words, a hint of astonishment appeared on his face. He flung his sleeve and erupted with the majesty of a quasi-sage. This projection cannot use more than 10%-20% strength of the main body, but it is still enough to deal with a master god. If you don't join us, then you won't walk out of this palace hall. Ha. Li Yunmu raised his head, and his eyes turned red as the demonic energy surrounding his body erupted. Threads of black came out from his chest and crawled to his cheek, making him look extremely wicked. Let me tell you something as well. Today, your projection and your son won't walk out of this palace. People from beyond the heavens must die. When he said that, the demonic energy became wanton, and he struck forward with his punch. Yin Emperor's projection dimen, and the Yin Son of Heaven vanished in a puff of smoke before he could say anything. When the projection looked at the dead Yin Son of Heaven, there was no emotion on its face. Yin Emperor just looked at Li Yunmu, who had undergone a demonic transformation, and indifferently smiled. This Emperor greatly admires the courage that S.H.A.D.O. friend has shown today. I hope that S.H.A.D.O. friend continues walking his path in the future. After saying that, the projection of Yin Emperor dissipated. Once the Yin Son of Heaven died, the divine palace returned to normal. The palace maids who had been infected by the Yin energy previously also returned to normal. When they saw Li Yunmu standing alone in the empty palace, they began to scream in a panic. Just a moment ago, they had all seen Li Yunmu killing the black-robed person. Li Yunmu snapped back to attention and looked at the palace maids huddling together and directly pulled them into his heavenly world. Right then, Chen Qiu was still in an ethereal state in the heavenly world, subconsciously practicing every move of the cultivation method. On the other side, the 15 balls representing the souls of gods were floating. They seemed to have given up on resistance. When the palace maids dropped down one after others in the heavenly world, the 15 souls of the gods trembled. They turned black and white in fear. Why would a group of palace maids drop from the heavens? And each of them is more beautiful than the last. What a pity, all of them are extremely beautiful, but we can't touch them. Everything is meaningless for us. Really true. This damned place. The palace maids looked at the balls of light speaking human tongue and got frightened for some time. Li Yunmu glanced into his heavenly world, then put his hand down and looked at the empty large hall. If the palace maids remained in the divine palace, they would be defiled by the 5 ancient gods. It would be better if he put them in his heavenly world for the time being and released them in the mortal world so they could live their lives properly. As for the Yin Son of Heaven who had been killed, Li Yunmu could not let the 5 ancient gods know about it. Li Yunmu thought for a moment, then slowly said, "System, you control this spell formation for now, so seal it completely. Don't let the 5 ancient gods find out that there's no one in this palace hall." After saying that, he turned himself transparent and walked out of the palace hall. On the path, he encountered countless guards and palace maids who didn't have the ability to discover anything and continued to patrol normally. After a moment, Li Yunmu went to the sealed hall at the center of the divine palace. When standing in front of it, he could sense a force field enveloping the sealed hall without any flaws. If he tried to enter forcefully, the force field would congeal light beams to attack and kill the intruder. The 5 ancient gods inside would also awaken. Li Yunmu took off the restriction-destroying halo and placed it in the formless force field. Once the halo separated from him, it froze the force field and created a human-sized cavity at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 902, The Great Principal Heaven. After passing through the opening, Li Yunmu retrieved the restriction-destroying halo and said in satisfaction, "This item is extremely useful, but can it pass through the sealed region without removing the seal of Master Gods?" "It cannot," the system said coldly. "That's all right. I just wanted to ask in case." Li Yunmu nodded. If it could really pass through the sealed region and acquire the rewards, he wouldn't need to release the Master Gods. It would be extremely good, but he had prepared himself mentally that it couldn't be so easy. After seeing the projection of Yin Emperor, a sense of crisis welled up in Li Yunmu's heart. Previously, his strength could be ranked as first in the origin world, since the Master Gods and True God were all sealed. When using the dark state, he could even kill master gods. He was a being just under true god and could be called a quasi-true god expert. But the price of using dark state was extremely high, so unless it was extremely necessary, Li Yunmu would not unleash it. From the mouth of Yun son of heaven, Li Yunmu had learned that the hidden enemies which the true god had concealed from him until then were the powers from beyond the heavens. They were extremely formidable, and they had more than 10 quasi-true gods as well as a true god-level existence. The power of belief was also released in the origin world by the powers from beyond the heavens. Because of it, the first battle of gods was unleashed in the origin world. If the seal was removed, the origin world would have to fight against the powers from beyond the heavens stationed outside. However, among the master gods, the presence of a traitor was extremely plausible. So instead of removing the seal, it was better to let it remain intact for the time being and hone one's strength until the true god from beyond the heavens undid the seal and began the war. Based on the cultivation of Yun son of heaven, Li Yunmu guessed that there was a limitation on the cultivation of the people from beyond the heavens who could enter the origin world after the seal loosened. That limitation was God realm. Li Yunmu didn't think much about it. He just walked to the sealed room of the 5 ancient gods in large strides. The most important thing to him right then was to obtain the heavenly grand ritual and start the second battle of gods. The 5 ancient gods and Azura had to die. When Li Yunmu opened the door, he saw the 5 ancient gods sitting together in a circle. In the middle, there was a high platform with a cup of white jade. It contained a cyan-colored liquid which was releasing countless strands that jumped toward the 5 ancient gods. They entered them through the nose and mouth. Li Yunmu could sense the enormous vitality of the heavenly grand ritual. If the liquid was swallowed, an ancient god could instantly recover to their peak state. However, it was obvious that the 5 ancient gods wouldn't allow any one of them to recover completely. After all, it would break the balance, which would be dangerous. With the heavenly grand ritual, the curse of short life of the Dragon Lady and Li Yunmu's illegitimate daughter could be broken. Li Yunmu walked forward and collected the heavenly grand ritual into his heavenly world, then quietly disappeared. The 5 ancient gods seemed to be in seclusion, but in reality, their attention was focused on the competition. They wanted to use Brunhilde to exchange for the strength of a master god from beyond the heavens. Because of that, the 5 ancient gods wouldn't know immediately that the heavenly grand ritual was stolen. While walking out of the divine palace, Li Yunmu turned around to glance back, then left in the direction of Lakshmi city. The atmosphere at the lotus pond was tense. The music clan's descendants sitting in the spectator stand firmly clasped their hands with wooden expressions. Each and every move on the competition stage influenced their heartbeat. However, when they saw that the expressions of the 12 holy daughters sitting on the platform were normal, and their hearts relaxed a little. If ancient goddess Brunhilde lost, the entire Lakshmi city would become a subordinate of the 5 ancient gods. The envoys sitting in the front were possessed by ancient gods. Jiutian Kuang was looking at the competition stage with golden eyes that held a hint of savageness. Yet Yen was at the end of the row, and he was full of fury. Difan and the envoy with crescent moon eyes kept on consoling him. No worries, you were only confused, and that's why you were defeated Yaksha. We can understand. Difan laughed loudly, and lightning constantly crackled in the crack between his eyebrows. Precisely, the new ancient goddess of Lakshmi city, Lu Qing, is even more beautiful than the Deva clan of Azura city. So you being charmed by her is completely normal, the envoy with crescent moon eyes chimed in. He did not match his calm demeanor previously at all. Yet Yen looked at the two of them and spoke with malice. Indra, you shouldn't ridicule me. We 4 possess similar strength, so if I was humiliated by Lu Qing, you 4 won't be much better. Let's wait until your turn, then we'll see whether you'll be charmed or not. No need to worry about that. Our hearts are much more stable than yours. Difan burst out laughing, then turned to look at Vishnu's constantly transforming figure. Sometimes, he would turn into a godmother wielding a divine staff and sitting on a mastiff blossoming with all sorts of divine techniques, while at others times, he transformed into a four-armed god wielding a divine sword and walking on lotus flowers. You see, Vishnu isn't charmed. Ancient goddess Lu Qing will be suppressed and beaten by one of his transformations. Humph! Yaksha coldly snorted, but didn't say anything. Rather than continue explaining, it would be better to let the facts speak for themselves. After some careful thinking, he also found the matter somewhat strange. He who originally stood at the peak of the ancient god realm was beaten in one move by a newly advanced ancient god. The four ancient gods felt that his mind wasn't firm enough, but he knew that wasn't the case. He was clearly defeated in one move, so how could he be charmed? On the stage, Brunhilde looked at Vishnu, whose figure was constantly transforming with a calm expression. They began fighting straight away, but although she was in a weaker position, Vishnu didn't gain any advantages either. Just a moment ago, when Yaksha was on the stage, Brunhilde had found his looks too unappealing, so she attacked him with her full strength and immediately defeated him. Although Vishnu's figure was changing constantly, but based on appearance, he was much better than Yaksha and was comfortable to look at. Brunhilde didn't use her full strength since she knew that Li Yunmue should be stealing the heavenly grand ritual right about then, so if the competition proceeded slowly, the attention of the five ancient gods would remain concentrated on her for a longer time. It would give Li Yunmue more time and make his mission to steal heavenly grand ritual much easier. While thinking about it, Brunhilde turned into a blur and avoided all sorts of divine techniques released by Vishnu. After a long time, Vishnu's expression turned ugly. The divine techniques he unleashed were very formidable, but Brunhilde's speed was very fast without giving him no opportunity to even touch her. Ancient goddess Lu Qing continues to dodge, but when will you fight back? Vishnu asked with some anger while looking at the countless afterimages. Brunhilde's laughing voice came through the afterimages. If you have the strength, then use those divine techniques of yours to hit me. It's a competition, so only natural that I dodge when you attack. If you manage to hit me, I'll lose. You are a woman, I was letting you escape, Vishnu said in a low voice. The rate at which he transformed increased. The afterimages were countless, so he also unleashed countless divine techniques that struck every inch of the platform. Chapter 903, The loss belongs to all of you. According to the rules of the competition, the contestants could not fly off the stage. If either of them crossed the boundary, they would lose. Ancient goddess Lu Qing said that as long as the divine techniques could reach her, it could be considered as Vishnu's victory. He seemed to have suffered losses, but in reality, he still had a comparative advantage. The competition stage was only so large, which meant that regardless of how Lu Qing dodged, she could not cross the boundary. Vishnu only needed to use divine techniques that would cover every inch of space in an instant. Once Lu Qing was hit by the divine techniques, he could be considered to have won. Countless divine techniques collided and destroyed the afterimages occupying the sky above the platform. In an instant, they dissipated like broken bubbles. Yet once the divine techniques faded away, Vishnu still couldn't see Brunhilde. He looked at the empty platform, and his figure finally stabilized into a god flickering with golden light. There were golden eyes on his palms, inspecting every inch of the platform. Nothing. Still nothing. After inspecting the entire platform, Vishnu still did not find Brunhilde. He was the closest to Master God realm among the seven ancient gods, and his figure irregularly fluctuated, gathering all the bloodline abilities of a Master God in one body. The golden-eyed god he showed right then was close to Azura's bloodline ability. The golden eyes in the hollows of his palms could see through all energy fluctuations. Then why couldn't he find Brunhilde's figure? In terms of years spent in cultivation, Vishnu naturally had more. He stood at the pinnacle of the ancient god realm, so even if he was suppressed to god realm, his strength was more than enough to deal with Brunhilde. You lose. When Vishnu heard Brunhilde's icy voice behind him, divine power bubbled forth. He turned around only to see Brunhilde, who had appeared out of nowhere behind him. I lose, he mumbled to himself. He lost. Vishnu's expression was absent-minded when he walked off the platform. Among the powerhouses like them, a small mistake was enough to end the battle. As long as they could sense a weakness in the enemy, win or loss would be decided in an instant. When Brunhilde appeared so close behind him, she could deal with him in one attack. Brunhilde looked at the 5 ancient gods underneath and carefreely said, "Next one." Yen looked at the dazed Vishnu as if looking at a companion and excitedly said to Indra, "You see, I told you I wasn't charmed by ancient goddess Lu Qing. Now not only me, but even Vishnu was defeated by her." Vishnu returned to his seat in a daze, and when he heard Yen's words, his expression turned even more unsightly. The 5 ancient gods wouldn't usually believe the others, even if their strength was comparable. However, he lost in a battle with the newly advanced ancient goddess Lu Qing. Now, if any of his remaining 3 brothers defeated Lu Qing, it would be like a slap to his face. Indra coldly snorted and said without paying the too much attention, "You two don't possess enough mental strength. Both of you were charmed by Lu Qing, wasn't that why you lost?" When Yaksha heard his words, he immediately retorted, "If you said that my mental strength wasn't enough, I could accept that, but Vishnu transformed into the golden-eyed god, who can see through all fabrications in the world. How could he still be charmed by the ancient goddess?" As the 2 ancient gods fought with words, Vishnu's expression grew more and more unsightly. Indra hadn't gone to the stage, so him using the opportunity to humiliate them was completely normal. But Yaksha was the first one to lose, so how could he continue questioning Indra like that? Wasn't he hitting his own face with every sentence? "All right, if you have the ability, then go and fight ancient goddess Lu Qing, then we will see how strong your mental strength is," H.A.C.K said with a cold snort. Indra laughed, then proceeded toward the stage. In the spectator stand, Yaksha turned to Vishnu and indignantly said, "I want to see if Indra can last until the end. Perhaps he can, perhaps he cannot. The heavenly eye between his eyebrows is very formidable. It seems to me that ancient goddess Lu Qing charmed you before the competition even began. Now that you two have shown him the path, Indra will naturally be alert. Apart from the charms, ancient goddess Lu Qing cannot compare to us in regards to foundation." On the stage, an oval-shaped packet protruded in the space between Indra's eyebrows. A crack developed in it, which seemed to be his third eye. There was nothing within it, it was completely black except a ball of thunder emitting sparks from time to time. "Ancient goddess Lu Qing, the 2 bouts you won previously were only a fluke. My 2 brothers don't possess enough mental strength and were charmed by you. But I won't be. I possess the heavenly eye which can restrain your charming technique. If you still want to use it, I would advise you to be a little bit careful," Indra said with a faint smile. Brunhilde snorted but didn't reply. At that moment, she didn't know whether the 5 ancient gods were excessively arrogant or just plain stupid. Even after 2 bouts of competition, they hadn't discovered her strength. They really believed that she was using the block of meat that was her body to unleash charming techniques. Since Lu Qing had a heaven-shaking body, anyone who saw her would fall in love without any extra techniques. "Talk less rubbish. If you really are so confident, then quickly beat me." Indra didn't reply, but his strange heavenly eye focused upon Brunhilde. In front of it, everyone was only a block of meat, so it could deal with all sorts of charming techniques. At that moment, Brunhilde was only a red skeleton in the heavenly eye, and Indra placed his hands in front of his chest to congeal a dazzling ball of lightning. During the battle, he could not use ancient god realm's cultivation, but no one had said that he could not use a technique which could produce an attack comparable to that of an ancient god or make use of his innate remarkable abilities. Apart from using the heavenly eye, he also possessed the bloodline ability of heavenly lightning. Among the lightning laws, the most difficult to control was the primal heavenly lightning whose power was comparable to an attack of a master god. Indra was ranked second among the ancient gods precisely because of his primal lightning. Even in a restricted state, it was comparable to an attack from an ancient god. The only limitation in the competition was on cultivation. There was nothing that said Indra could not use the primal lightning, which was comparable to an attack of an ancient god in terms of strength. Within a few breaths, the ball of lightning in Indra's hand enlarged quickly until it was as large as him. Indra is really cautious. I knew it. He is playing dirty. No wonder he was so confident. Humph. Yaksha snorted, and his deep blue eyes turned somewhat malevolent. The 5 ancient gods had been staying in the divine palace from the time they were born, so they had lived together for a long time and were extremely familiar with each other. Indra had immediately used the heavenly eye once he stepped on the stage in order to defend against the charming technique used by ancient goddess Lu Qing. Then, he used the primal lightning, which was as strong as an attack from an ancient god. Indra was using his all to ensure that ancient goddess Lu Qing wouldn't be his opponent. After all, in the 2 previous rounds, ancient goddess Lu Qing hadn't only used her charming technique. Her speed was also very fast. Indra's primal lightning could cover the entire stage, but he wasn't certain that his attack would land. Chapter 904, One Punch. Before his defeat, Vishnu's figure had transformed continuously, and he had unleashed countless divine techniques covering the entire platform. But none of them hit ancient goddess Lu Qing. Indra naturally wouldn't make this type of mistake. He would instead spread the primal lightning in all directions. As long as Lu Qing was on the stage, she would definitely be hit. If that happened, Indra could easily win the competition. Yaksha's expression turned increasingly more unsightly as he watched, and he said in an icy tone. Indra could be considered to have won, but only because of my and Vishnu's contribution. There's nothing to be proud of. Vishnu did not say anything. Indra's move was even more dangerous than when he had used the divine techniques. Although he had unleashed many divine techniques, Lu Qing's speed was very fast, and she had dodged them all. However, after Indra released the primal lightning, he first covered himself so that Lu Qing couldn't get close to him. In such a situation, a favorable conclusion was preordained. In the end, Lu Qing would lose after coming in contact with the primal lightning. Not necessarily. If Lu Qing possesses strength comparable to that of a normal ancient god, her punch could destroy the barrier of primal lightning and wipe out Indra, Shiva said suddenly. Yaksha and Vishnu began to laugh after hearing his words, as if Shiva had made a funny joke. Ordinary ancient god's strength? Lakshmi's clan has always walked the path of sound laws, which is quite similar to that of the Deva clan of Azura city. God Shiva, do you think that Lakshmi's clan has gods who walk the path of close-quarter combat and cultivate their physical body? Yaksha said while laughing. As he spoke, Indra's shout echoed through the competition stage. The 4 ancient gods looked over to see ancient goddess Lu Qing not having moved from her original spot. She was looking at the growing primal lightning barrier with a calm expression. Only after some did she take a step forward. In a blink of an eye, she arrived in front of the primal lightning barrier and, under everyone's gazes, stepped inside. The instant she came into contact with the primal lightning barrier, sparks flew into the air. Each of the sparks that flew out concealed formidable power. But as if Lu Qing's body was a no-man's land, as soon as the sparks hit her, they dissipated. When she fully entered the primal lightning barrier, the whole audience went silent. The 12 holy daughters had calm expressions since they found this scene extremely normal. The expressions of the descendants of music clans sitting at the edge of Lotus Pond were grave, however. They firmly clasped their both hands, afraid that the newly advanced ancient goddess of their clan would fall. The ones who had the greatest reaction, however, were the 4 ancient gods on the secondary stage. Only God Shiva's expression was indifferent. The 2 crescent moons were slowly revolving in his eyes as if confirming whether what was said just then was true or not. The faces of Yaksha and Vishnu were full of incredulity. Impossible, how could ancient goddess Lu Qing's body possess the level of ancient god in terms of hardness? Yaksha cried out in surprise. But even if he couldn't believe it, the scene from just a moment ago was vivid in his mind. Lu Qing had passed through the primal lightning without suffering any damage. The attack, which could be considered as equivalent to an ancient god's, dissipated after striking her body. You lose, Vishu said with a strange expression. The instant Lu Qing entered the primal lightning barrier, Indra lost. The competition limited their cultivation to God realm, so Indra could barely control the primal lightning using his bloodline ability. Thus, from the beginning, Indra had used the heavenly eye to avoid being charmed by ancient goddess Lu Qing. He wholeheartedly focused upon primal lightning, which meant that he fixed his body in one place and couldn't budge. According to his plan, once the primal lightning spread through the entire stage, Lu Qing would lose. However, she used her ancient god-level body to enter the primal lightning barrier, where Indra was like a sitting duck. A loud bang resounded, and the primal lightning on the stage dissipated. Lu Qing extended her lily-white hand and punched Indra's heavenly eye. The girls of the music clan. The four ancient gods. Indra flew out of the stage and landed in the lotus pond. The water rose to the waist of a person when he fell in. I hadn't expected that ancient goddess Lu Qing would be so difficult to deal with. Even 5 ancient gods cannot be her opponents. With ancient goddess Lu Qing here, it seems like the 5 ancient gods cannot coerce our Lakshmi city into becoming their subordinate state. When ancient goddess Lakshmi will come out of her seclusion, Lakshmi city will have 2 ancient gods. The music clan's descendants sitting at the edge of the lotus pond discussed the proceeding among themselves with smiles at the corner of their faces. They were no longer so tense about their future. Once they saw the third one battle, the descendants of the music clan were no longer terrified. The 5 ancient gods had existed for an eternity, while ancient goddess Lu Qing had newly advanced, so her loss was clear as water on the onset, but they had no choice but to hold the competition. Yet right then, only 2 ancient gods remained of the 5. As long as they were beaten, Lakshmi city would have the authority to dictate terms in the alliance with the 5 ancient gods and wouldn't become their subordinate. Indra flew out of the lotus pond and looked at ancient goddess Lu Qing standing without any care on the stage. Ancient goddess Lu Qing was indeed holding back. Your music clan's goddess, but you walk the path of tempering your body, he said in a gloomy voice. Is there a problem? Music clan's ancient goddess Lakshmi walks the path of practicing sound laws, so why would I want that old path? The path of being proficient in close combat is powerful, so I naturally chose to walk it, Brunhilde calmly said while shooting a glance at the inflamed crack between Indra's eyebrows. Humph! Indra snorted, then returned to his seat. The moment he sat down, Yaksha began to ridicule him, returning all the words Indra had said to him just a moment ago. Vishnu's expression also changed slightly for the better. Indra's defeat allowed the 2 ancient gods who had lost previously to regain some face. Everyone was in the same boat. You should go now. At this moment, only you and Garuda remain among the 5 of us. We will need to rely on you to win, Vishnu said while looking at Shiva. God Shiva looked at ancient goddess Lu Qing standing on the stage and shook his head. I also walk the path of seeing through everyone. If ancient goddess Lu Qing only used the charming technique, I would be confident in beating her, but she walks on the path of close-quarter combat, so I cannot defeat her. If I go, I will also lose. Vishnu didn't say anything since he understood God Shiva's meaning. The 7 ancient gods of Lanlo had obtained their bloodline power from the Master God, which was why they were somewhat similar. For example, his bloodline ability was the most similar to that of the Master God, but there were many paths and not every path was pure. His strength also ranked among the lower half among the 7 ancient gods. Although Indra's heavenly eye didn't have a very formidable ability, it should have been sufficient to break Lu Qing's charming technique. Shiva specialized in the path of the divine eye, so his physical body was only at the peak of God realm. If he confronted Lu Qing, there was no chance of victory for him. Just like he said, even if he went up, he would only add another loss. Since he understood that he would lose, it was better to just not go up. The gazes of the 4 ancient gods concentrated on Garuda, who hadn't said anything until then. Among the 5 ancient gods, Garuda's strength was the most formidable, and he could even contend against Azura if he hadn't been injured. Chapter 905, Evenly Matched. As it turned out, Garuda also walked the path of close-quarter combat. His bloodline energy was gathered on the wings, which made him number 1 below Master God in terms of speed. Although right then he only possessed his descendant's body and his cultivation as well as physical body were at the level of a peak god, it was more than sufficient to deal with ancient goddess Lu Qing. Although her body had attained ancient god level in terms of strength, she should be unable to compete with Garuda in terms of speed. As long as he discovered even the slightest weakness in Lu Qing's body with his speed, victory could be considered as his. Garuda languidly stood up from his seat with his golden eyes focused on ancient goddess Lu Qing standing atop the platform as if watching her prey. The 5 ancient gods had agreed with her demands and descended to the mortal world, but it was not because they were in love with her and wanted her for themselves. Instead, they wanted to return to the divine palace with ancient goddess Lu Qing and offer her as sacrifice to the Yin Son of Heaven. As long as he liked her, the position of Master God would be theirs. It was the reason why they let everyone believe that the 5 of them had fallen in love with ancient goddess Lu Qing at first sight and thus put forth such an unreasonable request. Only by using this reason could they prevent other gods from discovering that the 5 ancient gods had already pledged allegiance to the powers from beyond the heavens. The internal strife was nothing new for the ancient gods of the origin world. If the ancient gods of other regions discovered that Lanlu was collaborating with beyond the heavens, probably all of them would be dealt with straight away. Garuda slowly stood up. His figure flashed and he appeared on the stage. If ancient goddess Lu Qing admits defeat, then perhaps you can preserve your good looks, Garuda said calmly with his eyes focused on Brunhilde. The difference between his and Indra's tone was that implied that it was only a trivial matter. Brunhilde sensed the passionate gaze and coldly snorted before saying, when Indra stepped on the stage, he also said similar words, but in the end, he was thrown into the lotus pond. Sometimes you shouldn't speak too much. Her words amused the music clan's descendants sitting at the edge of the lotus pond, and they began to smile. Indra coldly looked at the stage and snorted. Then let's begin. Time to get it done quickly, Garuda expressionlessly said. Just after saying that, his body erupted with formidable divine presence, and a pair of wings instantly spread out on his back. His feathers were extremely sharp and glittering. The next instant, Garuda's figure changed into a blur rushing toward Brunhilde. Brunhilde's expression was very normal. She stretched her limbs without paying much attention and extended her punch to attack the blur. The punch collided with the blur with a loud noise. Brunhilde retreated 2 steps, and a hint of disdain appeared in her eyes. Just a moment ago, none of them had used their divine techniques, but punches to attack each other. When competing on the strength of the physical body, Brunhilde's body, which was at ancient god level, was a cut above. However, Garuda was not afraid of it, which showed just how formidable he was. Garuda wasn't using his own body in the competition, but that of a god-level descendant. His cultivation and physical body's strength were both at god level. Only when he used the bloodline ability could he produce the same effect as when he was using his main body. Relying on his speed and god-level body, he almost drew a tie against an ancient god-level body. He only came out at a slight disadvantage. He was worthy of being called the most formidable among the 5 ancient gods. Brunhilde thought about it, and based on the strength revealed by Garuda just then, he was quite likely to be on the same level as Azura. If Garuda's main body was present, then perhaps she might not have won. But for the competition, Garuda was using his descendant god and only had some advantage in terms of bloodline ability. If Brunhilde, using her main body, lost the battle, she wouldn't have any face to return to the land of ice. Come again. Brunhilde said in a lovely voice, and her body covered in muslin erupted with formidable power. It created cracks in the surrounding space. She turned into a blur and rushed toward Garuda. Vigilance was clear on the face of Garuda flying through the air. His eyes were filled with intent to battle as he rushed forward. The two blurs collided in the air. They hadn't used divine power, but the surrounding space was distorted and even cracks spread out. Whoa, how formidable are their physical bodies! Yaksha said with incredulity after drawing in a sharp breath. Among the 7 ancient gods, he had inherited the strength bloodline of Master God and whole body's divine power. But if he didn't use his divine power, he couldn't cause the space to distort just by relying on the collision of his physical body against the target. When he saw what was happening on the stage, he couldn't help but become doubtful as to who exactly had inherited the strength bloodline of the Master God. Sure enough, your guess was correct. If you had been there just now, I am afraid you wouldn't have been any better off than Indra, Vishnu said with a smile. He wasn't paying much attention to the battle on the stage. Garuda was certainly going to win. He had already observed 3 rounds, so if he still lost, he should rethink his whole life. After images constantly appeared in the sky and dissipated in a flash. More appeared then, and this loop continued endlessly. Lu Bailing rushed to the 12 holy daughters at that moment and took the final seat. When she saw the after images on the stage, she blinked in confusion and suspiciously asked holy daughter H.A.C.K sitting beside her, "What's the current situation?" Holy daughter H.A.C.K, who had been watching enthusiastically, turned around and looked suspiciously at Lu Bailing. "Where were you until now? Ancient goddess Brunhilde has already defeated 3 ancient gods, so only this Garuda remains." After saying that holy daughter H.A.C.K began to blink, suddenly feeling dizzy. She took a deep breath, but fear filled her heart. The 2 parties had agreed to use only god-level cultivation during the competition, but the power emitted by both of them had already surpassed the limits of God realm and touched upon the ancient God realm. When H.A.C.K, who was a god, glanced at the fight, she surprisingly felt dizzy. She was just spectating, yet her soul was still shaken. It was just too terrifying. Then doesn't this mean that as long as she wins this round, ancient goddess Brunhilde will win? Lu Bailing said while shifting her eyes to the stage. She wondered just how marvelous a battle between ancient gods would be. Holy daughter H.A.C.K blocked Lu Bailing's eyes with her hand and reminded her, "You are only an initial stage sage flux expert right now, so your soul might fly out while watching this battle. You mustn't think of peeping recklessly, or you might lose your life." After hearing that, Lu Bailing obediently closed her eyes. The other holy daughters also waved their hands, unleashing divine techniques toward the spectator stand at the edge of Lotus Pond to block the gazes of the music clan's descendants. From that moment onwards, those who didn't possess god-level cultivation didn't have the qualifications to watch the battle. On the competition stage, Garuda stopped and vigilantly watched the after images covering the sky. His guard rose with each passing second. With one exchange, he understood just how formidable was the strength of ancient goddess Lu Qing. It was completely different from that of a newly advanced ancient god like they had thought. Instead, it resembled that of a veteran ancient god. Regardless of whether it was close-quarter combat or techniques, Garuda couldn't obtain any advantage. Chapter 906, Disparity. Garuda could understand if he didn't get any advantage in close-quarter combat or techniques. Since Lu Bailing said that close-quarter combat was her path, then naturally she would have reached great heights in her field. Although it could be said that Garuda walked the path touching on close-quarter combat, his main body had already reached ancient god realm in terms of physical strength and was even more formidable than that of Yaksha, who had inherited the strength bloodline. But his speed was his true advantage. If Yaksha relied on strength to break everything, Garuda relied on speed to do that. In front of true speed, everything was useless. In the first exchange, he had used speed to amplify his physical strength to draw a tie with Lu Qing, and he only came out at a slight disadvantage. But when they exchanged blows for the second time, Garuda discovered that Lu Qing's speed was only a hair slower than his. He wanted to fight with her at close quarters, but he could only catch her after image. Even if he possessed tyrannical strength, if he couldn't touch the enemy, then everything was useless. What kind of situation was that? Who exactly was the ancient god who had inherited the speed bloodline of a master god? Garuda looked at the after-images in the sky with his golden pupils. In his heart, he was sure that if the deadlock continued, then there wouldn't be any winner. Just a moment ago, while he was observing the 3 rounds of competition, Lu Qing had never used her full strength, causing them to misjudge it. That only left one method. The next instant, Garuda slightly bowed toward the sky and began to emit golden light from his body. After it dissipated, a bird with a golden crown and golden wings appeared. Garuda surprisingly revealed his true appearance. This ancient goddess Lu Qing is really formidable. I hadn't expected that the youngest sister would be nurturing such a dragon, hiding such a character. As expected, everyone has hidden themselves deeply, Vishnu mumbled. This is the first time Garuda has revealed his true form in front of so many ants. But I want to properly observe it, Yaksha ruefully said. Most ancient gods usually appeared with their original appearance, except Vishnu who kept transforming constantly, but Garuda appeared in human form in front of others. In the image worshipped by mortals, Garuda appeared as a half-bird, half-human hybrid. It could be said that the only people who had seen Garuda's true appearance were experts of the same level. Yet he had revealed his original appearance in reply to Lu Qing's true strength. As for what she had previously displayed, it was only the tip of the iceberg. Garuda lightly screeched, and the countless after-images in the sky scattered. Brunhilde's white figure appeared with a confused expression, then she stepped into a crack in space. The next instant, an after-image entered the crack chasing after her. The 2 people entered the space, and the 12 holy daughters underneath were unable to make out the situation. Among the 4 ancient gods, only Indra, Shiva, and Vishnu could see the true situation. The 3 of them used their heavenly eyes, and their expressions turned strange. What is the situation? Did Garuda cripple ancient goddess Lu Qing? Yaksha asked with anxiousness when he saw the twisted faces of his companions. Garuda usually wouldn't open his mouth, since his temperament was the proudest. Ancient goddess Lu Qing had forced him to reveal his true appearance, so he might do anything to Gur. But if ancient goddess Lu Qing was beaten until she was half dead, she couldn't be offered to Yin Son of Heaven. No, is Garuda being beaten? God Shiva slowly asked with a hint of astonishment in his eyes. Yaksha was startled after hearing his words, then inquired after a few seconds, God Shiva, what did you say? Just as he finished, the screech of a bird appeared in the sky above the stage. Everyone underneath looked toward the source of the sound and saw a crack appear in the sky. A bird emitting golden light came out of it, and it was followed by an enormous body. Before the 12 holy daughters and 4 ancient gods could react, the half of Garuda which had appeared was pulled back into the crack while the crown on his head fell down to the ground. Everyone present turned quiet, but only after a long time did the 4 ancient gods manage to react. All of their expressions turned strange. Garuda in his original form was somehow still being beaten by ancient goddess Lu Qing. What kind of situation was that? The 4 ancient gods looked at each other with their hearts full of suspicion. It was completely different from what they had expected. Garuda was a peak existence among the ancient gods, so how could he have been grabbed and pulled back to be beaten some more? Is this ancient goddess Lu Qing using her ancient god-level cultivation? Yaksha suddenly asked. The 3 ancient gods shook their heads. Although the 2 combatants had entered a crack in space, they could still be seen after the 3 gods focused their gazes. They could clearly see that ancient goddess Lu Qing was only using god-level cultivation. Not for one moment had she brought out her ancient goddess-level cultivation. After a few breaths, another crack appeared in the sky. It expanded in both directions, and a white figure slowly walked out. It held a palm-sized golden-winged bird in its hand. Brunhilde returned to the competition stage with a carefree expression on her face. Garuda, whom she held in her hand, was then thrown toward the direction of the 4 ancient gods. The palm-sized, golden-winged bird fell near the legs of the 4. You all lose. The 12 holy daughters had unleashed their divine techniques to block the gazes of the music clan's descendants, so the spectators hadn't known what exactly was the final result of the competition until they heard those words. Then, all of them jumped up and cheered. The four ancient gods looked at Garuda lying at their feet resembling a golden chicken with only a few feathers left on his body. The four ancient gods were speechless. They looked at each other but didn't say anything. The crescent moons kept revolving in one of their eyes, and he extended his hand to grab Garuda. Indra, who originally had a gloomy expression, smiled then. He stood up and came to see Brunhilde on the competition platform. Ancient goddess Lu Qing really kept herself hidden deeply, even us 5 brothers with the same cultivation couldn't be your opponent. My little sister's luck is really good to have a character like you by her side. You flatter me. The competition can be considered to have ended, so you 5 should return to the Divine Palace. As for when will the alliance of Lakshmi City and 5 ancient gods will go to deal with Asura, I will tell you, Brunhilde said without giving the slightest face to the 5 ancient gods. The instant she had entered the crack, she obtained information from Li Yunmu that the 5 ancient gods were colluding with the power from beyond the heavens and wanted to offer her as a slave to the Yin Son of Heaven in exchange for position of a master god. After learning this information, she didn't suppress her strength and viciously beat Garuda in the crack. When Indra heard her words, he was silent for a long time before suddenly saying, "Deal with Azura." I seem to have heard ancient goddess Lu Qing's words wrong. This competition was only to determine whether you would return to the Divine Palace with us or not. It has no relation to dealing with Azura. As he said that, the expressions of the 12 holy daughters turned dark. They looked at the 5 ancient gods with a hint of rage in their eyes. Indra overruled all the previous agreements like a marketplace hoodlum. Brunhilde pretended to not have understood him clearly and inquired, "What do you 5 ancient gods mean?" Chapter 907, Soaring Fury. What did it mean? Of course it meant that all the previous words were no longer true. According to the previous agreement, the 5 ancient gods and Lakshmi City would ally to deal with Azura. The only condition was that the newly advanced ancient goddess Brunhilde would be exchanged and they could bring her to the Divine Palace. In the plans of the 5 ancient gods, however, ancient goddess Lu Qing was the heir of ancient goddess Lakshmi and should have inherited her sound laws. None of the abilities passed down by the master god were weak, but after the appearance of power of belief, the strength of the 7 ancient gods began to change, and a clear ranking appeared. Ancient goddess Lakshmi was at the very bottom, and just above her were Yaksha and Vishnu. When based on that, how could Lu Qing, a newly advanced ancient goddess, be an opponent of the 5 ancient gods? Even if all of them were suppressed to the god realm, they could still beat her. But reality showed that ancient goddess Lu Qing didn't walk the path of practicing sound laws, but rather that of close-quarter combat. She possessed a formidable physical body, and even Garuda, who was the most powerful among them, was beaten until he lost almost all his feathers. Indra put on a fake smile and slowly said, "Does ancient goddess Lu Qing not understand my meaning? Even if you won the competition, whether there's an alliance or not, or when we fight against Azura, that will be decided by us." When he said that, the faces of the 12 holy daughters turned dark, but they didn't say anything. From the time the 5 ancient gods sensed the presence of Lakshmi's soul in Azura, Lakshmi City's position became weak. The 5 ancient gods knew that ancient goddess Lakshmi had sustained serious injuries under Azura's attack, and they took advantage of it. Their original plan was to swallow Lakshmi City completely, but after ancient goddess Brunhilde appeared, they felt somewhat afraid and used her as a bargaining chip for an alliance to deal with Azura. But despite losing the competition, the 5 ancient gods wanted to keep the authority in their hands and brazenly denied their previous words. A smile appeared at the corners of Brunhilde's lips and she slowly said, "Then what condition do you 5 ancient gods have for allying to deal with Azura?" "Very simple. As long as ancient goddess Lu Qing follows us to our divine palace, we 5 ancient gods will ally with Lakshmi City to deal with Azura." When Indra saw that Lu Qing herself mentioned the issue, he felt great. Since ancient goddess Lu Qing spoke about the problem, it meant that she had spent quite some time thinking about it. After all, she was an ancient goddess of Lakshmi city, so how could she not think of her clan? If Lakshmi city didn't ally with the 5 ancient gods, how would they deal with Azura? Only with cooperation could they seize back the missing part of ancient goddess Lakshmi's soul from Azura, which would allow her to recover completely. In such a situation, Lu Qing only had one good option. Brunhilde looked at the smiling Indra, and a hint of disgust appeared in her eyes. Previously, she didn't know what sort of ghost had possessed the 5 ancient gods, so she believed that they had fallen for the mortal body of Pipa clan's ancestor and so mentioned such a condition. However, just a moment ago, she had learned from Li Yunmu that the 5 ancient gods were colluding with the powers from beyond the heavens. In order to become master gods, they wanted to offer her a sacrifice to earn favor with the Yin Son of Heaven, who was a person from beyond the heavens. From an ancient goddess, they wanted to turn her into a lowly servant. Such a plan made Brunhilde, an ancient goddess of the land of ice, hold them in contempt. Disdain was all she felt when she looked at them. What are you all when you can't even beat an old woman like me? And you still want to put up conditions? A cold smile appeared at the corners of Brunhilde's lips, and she erupted with ancient goddess presence, then extended her hand and grabbed the descendants possessed by the 5 ancient gods. Under the pressure of an ancient goddess, Indra, who was originally filled with smiles, lost his composure and loudly howled, "*TCH, are you mad? You dare to attack us 5 ancient gods? Your Lakshmi city will be wiped out. Damn it, vixen!" The jade-white hands suppressed the 5 ancient gods, and 5 balls of light flew out of the bodies of the god-level descendants. They rushed toward the divine palace in the sky. Once suppressed, the descendants of the 5 ancient gods turned into dust without a chance to wake up again. At the same time, the presence of a second ancient goddess erupted nearby, and Lakshmi's voice spread through the whole Lakshmi city. From now on, all ties between this seat and you 5 ancient gods are broken. If you dare to descend in Lakshmi city with your mortal bodies, I will make sure you all disappear forever. The souls of 5 ancient gods continued cursing while rushing toward the divine palace in the sky. Brunhilde raised her head and looked at the 5 soul parts with a calm expression. When the 5 ancient gods returned to the divine palace, they would soon discover that heavenly grand ritual had disappeared. At that time, they could only ally with Lakshmi city and send troops to attack Azura city. Right then, Brunhilde really wanted to see the reaction of the 5 ancient gods when they saw that heavenly grand ritual was missing. While thinking about it, she began to smile. When the surrounding music clan's descendants heard the 2 ancient gods being so aggressive, the haze in their hearts was completely swept away, and they began to cheer excitedly. The 12 holy daughters walked over and looked at Brunhilde with hesitation clear on their faces. Now that Lakshmi city had a falling out with the 5 ancient gods, I am afraid, one of the holy daughters said. Lakshmi city had 2 ancient gods right then, but only a part of ancient goddess Lakshmi's soul remained, and she could only display the might of ancient goddess by relying on power of belief. She was like a paper tiger. That meant that only Brunhilde could be considered as a genuine ancient goddess in the clan. But although she possessed formidable strength, there were enemies on both sides. How could she deal with 5 ancient gods by herself? Lu Bailing, who was the weakest, looked at the expressions of the other holy daughters but didn't say anything. Brunhilde looked at the hesitation on everyone's faces and said with a faint smile, "That will depend on whether these 5 ancient gods dare to attack Lakshmi city. Without the heavenly grand ritual, they won't let Azura suppress ancient goddess Lakshmi's soul. Because of that, their only option will be to form a sincere alliance with our Lakshmi city and attack Azura city." Holy daughter Hushi's eyes lit up at that moment. She recalled that Li Yunmu had gone to see ancient goddess Lakshmi previously. Could it be that he did so in order to steal the heavenly grand ritual? Don't tell me at that time, Lord Yunmu went to find. Before holy daughter Hushi could finish speaking, Brunhilde placed a finger on her lips and mysteriously said, "Don't say anything. The theft of heavenly grand ritual has nothing to do with Lakshmi city. Our two ancient gods are present in the city, so the only one who could steal heavenly grand ritual without being discovered is Azura. When the holy daughters heard Brunhilde's words, the anxiousness disappeared from their faces and were replaced by smiles. Not one of them had a favorable opinion of the five ancient gods. Once the heavenly grand ritual was stolen, the five ancient gods could only request for an alliance with Lakshmi city, so the initiative would be in their hands. It would be very different from when the five envoys came and turned everything upside down. In the divine palace, the souls of the five ancient gods passed through the barrier and flew into the sealed hall at the center to enter their bodies. The first one to wake up was Yaksha, and the moment he opened his eyes, he began swearing. Chapter 908, Everything is Gone. Only after cursing for a very long time did Yaksha stop. The second one to awaken was Garuda. He was beaten to a pulp by Brunhilde in the music clan's residence and had fainted in the end. Once the part of his soul returned to the main body in the divine palace, he was the second to awaken, which showed just how formidable he was. Garuda's expression was gloomy, and the pupils of his golden eyes looked straight ahead, which gave him a majestic feeling. Yet the scene of him being beaten by Brunhilde in the crack in space appeared in his mind, and humiliation washed over him. It could be said that from the time the heavens appeared, it was the first time he was bullied to such a miserable condition. If he had been fighting with his main body though, Lu Qing wouldn't have beaten him. Vishnu and God Shiva opened their eyes together and noticed the swearing Yaksha and the ashen-faced Garuda who had yet to say anything. Indra, who was thrown into the lotus pond, also had an unpleasant expression, but he was in a slightly better condition. After all, compared to losing all hair like Garuda, being thrown into the lotus pond was a trivial matter. What happened? What are the four of you looking at? Ancient goddess Lu Qing is so formidable that even the five of us couldn't beat her. Right now, Lakshmi city severed all ties with the five of us, so how about we go and attack directly, Indra gloomily said. He wanted to descend on Lakshmi city and attack right away. On one hand, he wished to return the humiliation, and on the other, he wanted to kidnap the heaven-shaking beauty Lu Qing and offer her to Yin Son of Heaven. Yin Son of Heaven had promised that as long as he was satisfied, he would reward the five ancient gods with the position of Master God. It was an important matter. After all, they wanted to get in contact with the quasi-true God expert Yin Emperor and rely on the power of beyond the heavens to survive. Such a backer might even allow them to create their own faction. That was the real aim of the five ancient gods. Vishnu and Yaksha looked at each other and slowly said, "We must curry favor with Yin Son of Heaven, or we won't be able to get in contact with Yin Emperor. This world doesn't have much time left. The seal has loosened, and beyond the heavens can now send people inside. If we don't use this opportunity and ride the big boat named Yin Emperor, I am afraid that we will die without leaving a body. Start preparations and inform the cities under us to gather for an attack on Lakshmi city." Just as Garuda said that, Shiva, who had remained silent until then, cut him off. The other gods looked at him, whose crescent moon-like eyes looked at the platform. "Who among the four of you moved the heavenly grand ritual?" he asked in a quiet voice. "Isn't the heavenly grand ritual?" Yaksha said with a smile as he turned to look at the platform. On the platform. At the sight of the empty platform, the five ancient gods instantly erupted with formidable ancient god presence. Before parts of their soul had descended to the mortal world, the heavenly grand ritual was on the platform in front of everyone's eyes, and they had all descended together. When they returned, they also came together to the sealed room. In other words, none of the five ancient gods could have tampered with it. There was also a defensive spell formation outside the hall and the divine palace, so if anyone had come in, they would have inevitably triggered it. But from the time the competition began, the five didn't sense any fluctuations in the defensive spell formation, which could only mean that someone familiar with it had entered. The only people familiar with the divine palace and the sealed room spell formation were the seven ancient gods, including Azura and ancient goddess Lakshmi. Only those two were viable suspects, but before the five ancient gods departed the music clan's residence, they had sensed the presence of ancient goddess Lakshmi erupt from the depths of Music Clan's residence. That left only one person, Azura. Azura! Yaksha howled, and his deep blue skin began to shine. A black divine prong appeared in his hand. It could only be Azura. The only one who could steal the heavenly grand ritual without disturbing the five of us is him. What's more, it would be just like him to use the moment when we were healing to swallow Lakshmi's soul. He really has wild ambitions. In order to make sure that we don't find trouble with him after recovering our cultivation, he stole the heavenly grand ritual, God Shiva said in an icy tone after a moment of analyzing the situation. Vishnu's gaze flickered and he said with a panicked expression, if Azura came to the divine palace, could he have discovered the existence of Yin son of heaven as well? The five ancient gods looked at each other, and their figures flickered and disappeared from the sealed hall. When they appeared again, the five of them were outside the residence which Yin son of heaven resided. At that moment, the entire palace looked black from outside. A layer of strong yin presence permeated through the wall, obstructing the perception of gods from investigating inside. While holding the divine prong in his hand, Yaksha walked forward to open the large gate of the palace hall, but Garuda stopped him and said in a calm tone, "Don't burst in without permission. If the Yin son of heaven is offended, you can forget about the position of a master god." When Yaksha heard him, he retreated a few steps. Garuda took the lead and walked to the great hall of the divine palace, then slightly stooped and said, "Yin son of heaven, we five ancient gods have come to pay a visit. We would like to trouble your distinguished self to open the door." There was no reply from the palace hall. The five ancient gods waited for a while, then Garuda opened the large gate and walked inside. The palace hall was filled with strong yin energy, and the entire inner part's temperature was extremely low. Yin son of heaven was lying on the main seat with his eyes closed while the black-robed man was standing respectfully by his side. A group of palace maids stood just below. God Shiva looked at everyone standing motionlessly and waved his sleeve widely. The palace hall's yin energy dissipated and Yin son of heaven as well as the black-robed man disappeared too. Soon after, even the palace maids turned into dust and vanished in the air. Yin son of heaven is dead. Vishnu mumbled in surprise. The other four ancient gods frowned, then Yaksha said, "Perhaps he was tricked by Azura to go to Azura city to receive a visitor. Although Yin son of heaven has said that our hospitality was great, there was no discussion about helping us. Perhaps Azura took out something which satisfied Yin son of heaven. Your theory is also possible." Yaksha, when Yin son of heaven came to the divine palace, he said that he wasn't the only one who came to Lanla from beyond the heavens. Lakshmi had always been different from us. She didn't use the power of belief and wouldn't participate in such matters. So it is clear that if there's another faction from beyond the heavens, they would be in Azura city. Do you believe that beyond the heavens came to the origin world looking for people to cooperate with? We all know what exactly they came for. Since Yin son of heaven isn't here, he was killed by Azura. That guy really does everything perfectly, Indra said with some alarm. Yaksha didn't speak anymore. When the first battle of gods broke out, everyone learned about beyond the heavens. Afterwards, True God and the five master gods sealed the entire origin world. But the seal had finally started to loosen, so beyond the heavens dispatched people to the origin world. They came to recruit natives to start fighting for territory. Among the powers from beyond the heavens, many were hostile to each other. Once Azura killed Yin son of heaven, the power from beyond the heavens behind Azura would naturally be excited for losing one competitor. But the five ancient gods were not happy. Not only was the heavenly grand ritual stolen, even the young master of the power on which they wanted to rely died in their divine palace. Everything was gone. Chapter 909, Battle against Azura City. Garuda looked at the completely empty palace hall with his hands behind his back. His lower body was tensed, his talons breaking the divine stones under his feet. The divine prong in Yaksha's hand emitted a thick scent of blood, which solidified into faint red blood energy wafting through the air. The other three ancient gods also displayed their divine presence, and cracks began to spread in the space around them. The five ancient gods were truly furious. Compared to what they saw after returning, losing face in the music clan's residence was simply an appetizer. Face was very important, but life was even more important. Azura had stolen heavenly grand ritual, interrupting the recovery of the five ancient gods. After assassinating the Yin son of heaven from beyond the heavens, he also pushed the trouble of it on the five ancient gods, which would create them an impossible to defeat enemy. When the first battle of gods broke out, the five ancient gods had learned of the powers from beyond the heavens and emperor monarchs. Yin Emperor was one of them, and he already had a cultivation of Master God at that time. Upon coming to entice the five gods, Yin son of heaven intentionally mentioned that Yin Emperor had already become a quasi-true god. As long as he advanced one step, he would become a true god. What kind of existence was a true god? They could create their own origin world. Yin Emperor who close to becoming a true god, so if he learned that his son had died in the divine palace, he would wipe out the five ancient gods with just the lift of his hand. What should we do now? Yaksha asked in confusion. Garuda turned around to look at the big palace hall and coldly said, "What else could we do? We must ally with Lakshmi city and go to battle against Azura city. Azura thinks that he has cut off our path of retreat, so let's see who exactly will die first. We came from Lakshmi city just now, and if we return, I am afraid that ancient goddess Lu Qing will refuse to cooperate with us," Indra said anxiously. In his heart, he felt hatred toward himself for speaking ruthless words just then. Now that he recalled them, they were like a slap to his own face. Karmic retribution came way too quickly. With his figure rapidly transforming, Vishnu slowly said, "The only option for us is to ally with Lakshmi city. That ancient goddess Lu Qing walks the path of close-quarter combat, and her strength is tyrannical. If she joins the five of us, Azura will die without a doubt. As long as he's gone, the other power from beyond the heavens will have to collaborate with us if they want to occupy the origin world. Notify the subordinates, ask every city to prepare for battle and wait for negotiations between us and Lakshmi city to complete before marching toward Azura city." After a moment, the five ancient gods transmitted their commands to the five cities under them. In the five clans, the gods discussed the orders spiritedly and began to organize half-god and above-level experts for war. The five ancient gods then descended with their main bodies from Divine Palace toward Lakshmi city while releasing vast and boundless divine presence. When the 12 holy daughters sensed the presence of five ancient gods, smiles appeared on their faces. Sure enough, Brunhilde's words were correct, the five ancient gods themselves came knocking on their door. When Brunhilde sensed the presence of the five ancient gods, she went to the visitor hall and sat down on the host's seat to calmly wait for them. After a few breaths, the figures of the five ancient gods appeared at the gate of the hall. Garuda landed at the front and slowly entered with a wooden expression. "Have you five ancient gods come to find trouble for our music clan? Your souls just returned to the divine palace not long ago, but you five directly descended with your main bodies." Brunhilde waved her hand, indicating for the five ancient gods to take a seat. Garuda looked at Brunhilde's calm expression, then sat down on a seat on the opposite side in a flash. After that, both sides exchanged pleasantries. When they had come to Lakshmi city before, which of the 12 holy daughters wasn't respectful to them? After all, given the presence of an enemy like Azura, Lakshmi city could only ally with the five ancient gods. The initiative had been in the hands of the five ancient gods, but because of Azura's actions, the situation changed. Garuda's expression changed. Although his heart was itching, he kept a smile on his face. "Ha! When all five of us came together, can ancient goddess Lu Qing not guess the reason?" When Brunhilde heard his words, she shot a glance at the five ancient gods and said in an attempt to probe them, "Have you five ancient gods really come to my Lakshmi city to find trouble? You must know that even if you five attack together, Lakshmi city also has two ancient gods. Ancient goddess Lakshmi can pull one of you with her, and I also can bring one down with me. I wonder whether the 5 of you have thought about this properly, which 2 will be throwing their lives away." When she said that, the atmosphere in the hall turned delicate. God Shiva sitting on one side looked at Brunhilde looking down on them and said calmly, "We 5 ancient gods didn't come to Lakshmi city to find trouble, but for the original matter to ally against Azura. Ancient goddess Lakshmi's soul was stolen by Azura, so don't you all want to snatch it back?" "Precisely, we 7 ancient gods were originally created by our master god and each of us received a part of his bloodline, so we can be considered as brothers and sister. However, Azura violated all laws of morality and devoured a part of Lakshmi's soul, so we brothers naturally must assist her in this predicament," Indra added from the side, completely forgetting about his arrogant actions on the platform stage just a moment ago. Naturally, the outsiders couldn't tell what he was thinking in his heart. The 5 ancient gods sealed their lips about the previously dispatched 5 god descendants as if the unpleasant matter hadn't happened at all. When Brunhilde heard their words, a smile appeared on her face, and she nodded in response. During her life in the land of ice, she had heard that the relationship between the gods of Lanlu was weak and that they shared no sentiments. The 7 ancient gods used all sorts of plans and schemes against each other, not even shying away from sacrificing their descendant gods. If any of them were given any importance, they were treated as the heirs. If they weren't given importance, however, they were considered the same as mortals. Yet the 5 ancient gods who were so cold-blooded had come running saying that Azura had violated all morality and they wanted to take justice for their younger sister ancient goddess Lakshmi. Such words were just an enormous joke. If Brunhilde believed them, then no medicine in the world could save her. If heavenly grand ritual hadn't gone missing and the yin son of heaven of beyond heavens hadn't perished, the 5 ancient gods wouldn't have come to Lakshmi city talking such words. But since they wanted to put on a play, Brunhilde would accompany them until the end. This is only natural. Azura has disregarded all the rules of Lanlu, even attacking ancient goddess Lakshmi without warning. Our Lakshmi city naturally wouldn't forget this. Since the 5 ancient gods are also thinking the same, then Lakshmi city will ally with you to deal with Azura, Brunhilde slowly said. After finishing, she paused for a moment, then looked at the 5 ancient gods sitting opposite her and said with a smile, "But let's have the ugly talk first. Do you 5 still have any conditions?" "No additional conditions. This time we come with a sincere intention to deal with Azura," the 5 ancient gods anxiously said. Chapter 910, Mortals in the Heavenly World. After the 5 ancient gods entered the guest hall for negotiation, the 12 holy daughters went to every corner of the music clan's residence to watch over it. After a moment, the 5 ancient gods returned to the divine palace. A formidable ancient goddess presence soared into the sky from the guest hall, and upon sensing it, the 12 holy daughters began to smile and returned. Li Yunmu was walking slowly through the narrow path leading to the territory of Azura city with hands clasped behind his back and a satisfied expression. Every time he passed by a village, he would walk inside. Not long after he came in, the originally lively village would disappear, only leaving behind an enormous hole. Beginning from just outside Lakshmi city, there were countless holes by the path. We have to use this time to collect people. You see, the 5 ancient gods will definitely descend to Lakshmi city and immediately start the battle between gods. If I don't collect the mortals, they will be turned into cannon fodder. Even if they survive that though, they will remain as puppets used for gathering power of belief for the gods, Li Yunmu said. When the system heard his words, it sneered and said, "Even if you save these mortals, they won't be of any use without at least 10,000 years of development. When I created the origin world, I created the rules in favor of the gods. Without godhood being bestowed, how can mortals become gods? Or do you want to use power of belief to make the mortals break through to God realm?" Li Yunmu snorted disdainfully and sneered upon hearing such a suggestion. Yin Son of Heaven had said that power of belief was introduced into the origin world by beyond the heavens to cause internal strife. If mortals used power of belief to become gods, then even if a master god was created, wouldn't it just create another era of gods? The creation of one failed product was enough. There was no need for another. Your initial direction was wrong, creating even more gods is useless. You allowed gods to be born with great advantages, like the god-level cultivation and eternal life. This was tantamount to putting a limitation on their potential which forced them to remain stuck at the same place. Mortals are different. They possess endless possibilities, Li Yunmu blurted out. From the time they were born, mortals were ordinary people and slowly experimented with different things to become more formidable. But even after becoming powerful, they still wanted to become even more powerful. The system was silent for a moment, then it said in a helpless tone, "Unfortunately, the time is too short. The origin world has been sealed for very long, and its strength is much inferior compared to before. Beyond the heavens have been developing for many years, and their strength far surpasses that of the past. You can see it yourself as well. Yin Emperor, who only had a cultivation of Master God that year, now has the strength of Quasi-True God. And back then, there were 10 people as powerful as Yin Emperor. 10 Quasi-True Gods?" Li Yunmu didn't reply, but he was sure that just the monarch emperors were enough to overturn the entire origin world. But there was also a true god-level existence in beyond the heavens. Encountering Yin Son of Heaven allowed Li Yunmu to understand just how formidable was the hidden danger that the system talked about. Sense of worry gripped his heart like it hadn't done for a long time, and he couldn't get rid of it. The crisis in the past couldn't compare to what was about to happen now. The enemy was so formidable that he was close to a panic. If the origin world was defeated by beyond the heavens, then all the life forms in the origin world would have the same fate as the palace maids. T.A. would be turned into dispensable servants or even cultivation tools. That would be an extremely miserable fate. Li Yunmu would never allow such a thing to happen. If there's any hope, then I will try it, otherwise, who knows what the outcome will be, he said. The system didn't reply and just disappeared in his mind. Li Yunmu kept walking by the path, putting every village he passed through into his heavenly world. In a short time, several large tribes as well as 10 small-scale villages appeared in the originally completely empty heavenly world. One after another, villagers walked out and looked at everything in the heavenly world. They found it new and odd. There were some people from neighboring villages who were acquainted, and when they ran into each other, they began to chat. After a while, the mortals began to tour the heavenly world. They first encountered an Azura clansman who was cultivating with his eyes closed. After the group observed him for a long time, they continued forward. After walking for some more time, they encountered a group of palace maids. When the mortals met the palace maids, they began to talk spiritedly with them. The palace maids, which were originally startled to see other beings, quickly sobered up and sized up the mortals. "Are you all mortals?" one of them probed. The villagers nodded, and the expressions of the palace maids crumbled. They began to wail loudly. After a while, one palace maid joined the group of mortals and said, "I am also a mortal, but I had come to believe that we will never see another mortal in this lifetime." A few women walked out of the group of mortals and consoled the palace maids. They continued forward together after that, but when they covered 100 meters, the palace maids stopped. "You shouldn't go further," one of them said anxiously. "It is very dangerous ahead. There is a group of gods imprisoned in a box, and they are extremely dreadful." The palace maids recalled the rude words of the imprisoned gods when they stood in front of the box. The gods who only existed in soul form brought a feeling that everything was finished in their hearts, and they began to tremble. A few women walked to the front. They embraced the palace maids and then consoled them, "You don't need to be afraid. We are so many people, so why should we fear those gods imprisoned in the box? Moreover, even if they are gods, they should be badly injured." The group led the palace maids in front of the box. There were 15 balls of light floating in the transparent cage, and they saw the group of mortals cautiously walking over. Instantly, faintly discernible voices of gods came from inside the box. I hadn't thought that we would see mortals here. You mortals, how can you see a god and not kneel? Aren't you afraid that you all will be killed? Look at the fiendish appearances of these mortals. They should be killed. If it wasn't for being trapped in this cage, these mortals would have died by now. The 15 balls of light kept shouting arrogantly and even revealed a faint divine presence, which they threw toward the mortals. The group calmly looked at the light balls and didn't feel uncomfortable because of the divine presence released by the 15 gods. However, the 7 or 8 palace maids were clearly intimidated and began to shudder. Don't need to be afraid, look at us. After those words were said, one after another, mortals picked up small rocks from the ground and threw them at the box. Just as they were about to collide with the box, they suddenly penetrated through it, and the god-hit released a blood-curdling scream. When the palace maids saw that even the smallest rocks were effective, they found it very mystical, but they also picked up a few and threw them at the gods.